Texas is a controlled chaos area. It always has been. We exist that way. That's what 101 was.
Hey, KLOL. Well, you know what the weather is? Stick your head out the door.
These FM stations no one ever heard of were reaching this counterculture. That grew, the music grew.
Man, it was freeform. The DJs got to play what the fuck they wanted, so they played whoever they felt like playing. If they didn't like your music, you weren't going to get played.
Hi, I'm Steele with my special guest tonight, Billy Idol.
Being a female rock and roll DJ was going to have a short shelf life. And when you tell me women can't do that job, it's like he laid down the gauntlet.
101 KLOL.
KLOL was the premier rocker of the Southwest. It was the shit.
Hi, this is Ozzy Osbourne. You're rocking on Saturday night with 101 Rock Day. Go for it.
The public that we were living with had seen everything but live sex and human sacrifice, and we were pushing the envelope to get them just as close as we could to that.
Yeah! 101, please.
When you need to rock and roll.
You know, when there was a KLOL, we just knew what to do, where to go and what was good.
The cultural changes always make the music change. Summer of Love, 69, moved everything along.
You can see the stars and stripes.
We had a moon shot, moon landing. You had Charles Manson. You had the Vietnam War. It was everything, all at once. So the culture was changing, and that meant the music was really changing.
Well, music always takes a step outside of the social norms and sort of the status quo, and that's where rock and roll was born. Rock and roll came out of not to be rich and famous at all. It was a protest, it was a form, it was a lifestyle.
It's hard for people to understand right now the power and the effect that FM radio had on the listener, because before that, AM radio was it.
I mean, radio was always important to me growing up because I came from, you know, like the 60s and the 70s where there was no MTV and there was no TV, period, you know, 3 channels. So radio is, you know, where I got my music from.
Yeah, each big city had their big station. KLOL was Houston. KLOS was LA. Q104 was over here in New York.
KMET in Los Angeles, and EBN Cincinnati, MMR in Philly, MMS in Cleveland, NEW in New York, BCN in Boston, and a handful of others, and they were right in that elite league.
The chemical makeup of your brain responds to atmospheric changes, sound levels.
We called it underground radio in the late 60s. We had huge libraries, and we could literally play whatever we wanted, whatever song off whatever album, and we weren't even restricted to rock.
We helped start what was the FM. Everybody got played in that format. Vanilla Fudge, Hendrix, Cream, The Who. Those were the underground, FM underground babies, you know?
Providing a wide spectrum of progressive music, WABX, Detroit.
First underground radio station I heard growing up in Detroit was WABX, and they were one of the most amazing things. When I first heard that radio station, I was turned on to it. It was like getting out of jail.
It'd go from Led Zeppelin to Otis Redding, you know, to Van Morrison to I don't know what, and it was so cool because I was a musician that didn't know who I wanted to be yet. I hadn't developed myself, so I was digging it all. I was singing Otis Redding songs and you know, learned Jimmy Page riffs, and so it had a profound influence on me.
The format was basically designed around creating musical sets. So we would play 3 or 4 songs that were themed.
I remember in Chicago, my midday guy got on a tear about playing train songs, and I said, well, let's see how many we can play. We went 5.5 hours of train songs.
It was very low-key, you know, laid back. Here's what you're going to hear, and they'd play the record, and they'd tell you a bit about the band, too.
The cool summer sounds of KNUZ, as refreshing as a dip in the pool.
I was working at KNUZ, 1230 AM, top 40 station, with the The Flower Power Hour. I was very fortunate to be on the radio playing top 40 records in a city the size of Houston when I was, 18, 19, 20 years old. Jim Pruett turned out to be there under the name of Tony Raven.
Ooh, beautiful. Let's see, I've been in the gun store business about 10 years now. Was in the Army, got drafted and went to Vietnam. I saw how easily civilizations can collapse and had to be armed. I was a combat reporter for the U.S. Army. And then, of course, I was in radio. And I came to Houston in '69 from Oklahoma City. I was the night guy, Tony Raven, on KNUZ. And, Tony Raven Night Flight, I'm sure you've heard of it.
You're listening to the sound of news, the sound of sports, the sound of information. KTRH, KTRH-FM, the sound of Houston.
One day, I got a phone call that people that ran KTRH had an FM version, had heard what I was doing. They said that we'd like to have a conversation with you about making KTRH-FM into its own radio station that plays progressive rock. The next thing you know, I was in charge of hiring a staff, pulling a format together, creating KLOL at 21 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, but all I knew is that rules tended to get in the way of really great work. August 7th, 1970, I played the first record at 6 p.m., I'm Free by The Who.
I listened to KLOL all the time. KLOL was my education. That was during my high school years. I started high school in 1971. And, listening to music when you're in high school is very important socially. You didn't want to show up in school and not have listened to, what's going on the radio. You didn't want to be the last person to know about a new song.
Mother's Family was the name that we gave to the KLOL staff when we put the station on the air in 1970. Actually, all the DJs lived together in this big house in Montrose, of course, just like in the movies. Bill Narum is one of Texas' great art treasures. He's also in our picture of the original KLOL air staff prior to signing on.
Bill Narum, who did our album covers for a while. And of course, your psychedelic, drawing there and everything. Well, Bill was great, man. I mean, he was an artist, absolutely, and ever since the word. I had the idea for running radio, but Bill had the idea of how to really make it live and have personality and context. The Runaway radio comes with two things. A tagline that says, "Free at last," and a ball and chain tied to his ankle. Because you're never really quite free. Not really.
We did cutting-edge things like our logo, K101. Out of the O is a marijuana leaf, which we call the ecology firm.
My dad absolutely knew what it was. There is no doubt about it. Saw the logo and said, "Dad, wow, what is that?" And I was at college. And he said, "Oh, it's merely an ecology fern." And he had a twinkle in his eye. He knew exactly what it was. KTRH was owned by my great-uncle, Jesse Jones. The TRH was the Rice Hotel. This is where President Kennedy stayed before he went out to Dallas and, sadly was assassinated. But this was the major hotel, downtown hotel.
The Rice Hotel was kind of like doing it at The Shining. You could order room service for breakfast.
And I can only imagine what they were thinking about, those freaky people up on the 6th floor, and they were right.
The staff at the Rice Hotel did not know what to make of us. They were used to the KTRH professional newsroom team. Then we walk in, a little different, controlled chaos.
I had pledged that no one would do, smoke in the studio and stuff like that. I was held responsible for it. And I did my best.
And there's KLOL and the incense pouring out because we want to make sure that everyone was pleasant.
I did have one complaint once. I'm not going to start naming off the names. Needed to stop doing coke in the studio because We played LPs, you know, albums. It'd go around and around, and they'd come across a white line of blow, and it'd go, "Hell, I'm rocking in the..."
They had some kind of an early warning system so that they always knew when people from KTRH were coming upstairs so they could get everything put away, I guess.
Hi, folks, and welcome to the Jam.
So, it's Crash.
Hi, this is Crash with your invitation to turn on and tune in.
The dude that goes to sleep every night on radio around 10 o'clock and leaves his microphone open.
Then, you know, somebody goes, "Where's the music?" And they go, "Oh, it's Crash. He's on the radio." "Oh, okay, we'll wait."
You weren't cool unless you had listened to Crash the night before, because Crash was always up to antics. He'd lock himself out of the control room. He would pass out on the air, and, you know, the record would go tick, 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 tick.
Crash and KLOL. That's the latest hit from Marseille Marceau. Thank you very much for listening. Here's Led Zeppelin.
What are you doing? Wait a minute. What are you doing? What are you doing? What is that?
Anytime now.
You know, that Crash is crazy.
Crash was part of, I had a weekly poker game that Crash was invited to a number of times. He was also a good friend, not just, you know, an acquaintance from the business or any of that stuff, you know. So, and Crash was a unique fellow, you know. They used to call me and Billy crazy, you know, him too. Crash being the bald fellow.
Because like every night we'd all gather around somebody's car, or a friend would call me and go, listen, he's sleeping. And you'd hear him in there snoring on the air. You're like, dude, wake up. Wake up, dude, you're on the air.
And it's almost like NASCAR, you know, waiting for the wreck. You were waiting for Crash to wreck. And, you know, you're going, "Oh my God, I hope everybody's okay." You know, and then the guy gets out of the car and waves to the crowd, and everybody goes, "Hey!" Well, when I came back, they came back, "Hey, what's up? Okay, here we are." And we go, "Hey!"
I want to tell everybody to buy the record, Dr. Hook, Bankroll.
Crash was one of my favorite DJs, and you know, he just had that credibility. When Crash played something, you wanted to listen to it. Crash took his time to explain why a song was important and why it was important to listen to that song. That's the sort of approach that draws, especially you know, formative 12, 13, 14-year-old kid. It draws you in and makes you really want to pay attention.
And Houston's first simulcast is Mother's Midnight Media Mix.
People knew Mother's Family, and actually the ratings were really good. But the advertisers wouldn't buy it because they thought, oh, it's just FM and that's just a bunch of hippies.
Threading through music born in our own cultural matrix, the agents of midnight artistry weave a carpet of colored sound vibrations.
I stayed for about 3 years till 1973, went off in the film business. I was shooting rock concerts and videos, and back at the radio station, they built their own building and moved from the Rice Hotel, where it all began, down to Lovett Boulevard in the Montrose.
The thing about KLOL, it was a family. You know, a lot of the jocks stayed with one another. They were roommates. We had a black female. Her name was Jackie McCauley, and Jackie was the music director. I must say, I was the first black male to work progressive radio, rock radio, in Houston. It was the most extensive library that I'd ever seen in my radio experience. That's how much music they had. They had it all. They had all the black music, all the rock music.
It seemed as if there was no playlist. It seemed as if you were being brought along and educated by whoever was playing the records. The criterion seemed to be not necessarily the style of song, but whether or not it was a good song, whether or not it was an important song, whether or not it was a song you needed to hear in its entirety.
KLOL was a pioneer in breaking new artists. That's when they really could.
Bruce Springsteen with us at 101. I don't think you're going to have any problems.
No, you know, I was really impressed, because, like, I'm from Jersey, I mean, that's a long ways away. And
I've never been here before, you know, I've never been in Houston before.
Bruce Springsteen and band will be back at Liberty Hall for 3 more nights, and then up in Austin next weekend.
Yeah.
This is KLOL in Houston, Texas. And Mr. Harrison, yes, you were saying.
I got George Harrison in the studio by probably insulting him. George was in town, his first American tour, and somebody in his entourage called the radio station. Couple seconds, this voice comes on the phone. Hi, this is George. I said, who? He said, it's George. George Harrison. I said, you know what? This is the worst friggin' impersonation I've ever heard in my life of George Harrison. I said, hey man, I know you guys are partying and you know, you're real high, you know, good drugs here in Houston, good weed, whatever, but you're a fool. He said, I'm George Harrison and I can prove it to you. We had a flashing light in the studio when you push the front door. So I put on the record and I go down to the front door. It's George Harrison.
Now, he happened to be the same guy who planted dope on me and John Lennon.
We talked about everything. We talked about drugs. We talked about their relationship, the Beatles' relationship. You know, I'm young. I'm like, hey, well, George, you know, you're a Beatle. How much cash do you have, buddy? You know, oh, Levi, I
haven't got a clue. Huh? It would be easier to ask Internal Revenue because they seem to have it all. You see, it depends. If you're talking about how much have I got?
Yeah. He says, well, if you mean it in me pocket or, you know, it really got. You know, I was a wild, young, black guy on a rock station that was swinging for the fence. Boom. You know, and he like, hey, well, let's go for it.
There's a lot of money about, but it all is owned by somebody else in a way, you know?
He said, Levi, if I give you $1 million, you know, you'd be dead or something like that, and you wouldn't, you know, you'd blow it, and you'd. I said, well, George, let's find out. You know, why don't you, you know, test me? But he was like, Levi, what would you do with it? And then we went into this whole spiritual thing and about, it's not about money.
This is to give you an idea of how silly the whole concept of money is.
When the interview was over, I said, well, George, this has been a great interview. Man. I said, I bet you've never done anything like this before. He says, Levi, no, I haven't, and I never will again. You know, there are only 2 interviews on that tour. Rolling Stone had one, and myself. And this interview is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's archived.
We're all living high on borrowed time and borrowed money.
Underground became more popular, and more of those radio stations popped up around the country. And they actually started drawing advertisers.
You know, went from $1 a spot to $2.50 a spot to $5 a spot to $450 a spot to $750 a spot. Then it became uncontrollable and unstoppable and scary.
FM stations no one ever heard of were reaching this counterculture. You know, and then we went into the 70s where it became, oh, this is an art form. It was this, it became its own culture.
The format didn't last, for one thing, because it was so eclectic that it drew a very loyal but small audience. And then around the mid-70s, a guy named Lee Abrams came up with a formatted version of progressive rock, which was called AOR, album rock. With that format, the music was essentially programmed for the DJs.
Because there was a whole generation of people that were just found the underground stations just a little too much. You know, if it was raining, you'd hear 2 hours of rain songs.
Tomorrow, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers will be here at the radio station.
We had so many bands that were breaking nationally, from Aerosmith to Van Halen to Ted Nugent to, you know, just a lot of bands that were breaking on AOR radio that never got any airplay on Top 40.
There was a time I remember where you just didn't listen to Top 40 anymore. That wasn't cool music. All the cool music was there. So it created, in a way, an underground scene of people that the hit songs didn't matter. You know, we were listening to what is now considered deep tracks, I guess.
We wrote a song called Heard It on the X. When we listened to those Outlaw stations in Mexico, that's what that was about. It's all about technology. You know, you could carry your FM with you, car or whatever. It was hard to carry, you know, back then it was hard to carry your music.
KILT had seized the notion that FM was coming along, and they put a live group of disc jockeys on KILT, but narrowed it to rock hits and some pop hits that kind of fit the mix. And it started challenging KLOL for that rock dominance. I was called by Jerry Lee, who was the station manager, and said, "We're changing the format, come help us choose what to do." And I said, "You know, Jerry, this is not a format I would change. I'd fix it, but changing it is not going to help."
Good evening and welcome to the second edition of the KLOL Sunday Night Stereo Magazine. I'm Brian Hill.
There was kind of a sense of change when I first got there, that this kind of magic atmosphere that had existed in the first 3 years of KLOL's life was slowly ebbing away. Whether that was by design or whether it was benign neglect, I really don't know. But by 1977, 78, frankly, the station had kind of fallen on a rough period. I mean, the ratings were not what they once were.
When we wrote and recorded Eliminator, we got a lot of crap about that at one time because people thought we were leaving our roots and deserting this and that. We were just experimenting like we always have, but it was just a kind of a jump. Well, you know, MTV came on. Video killed the radio star. Things went through quite a stir there at the beginning of the 80s and the end of the 70s. Radio was going through changes. Disco was all this stuff, you know.
By the time I got to KLOL, which was 7 years after my career began, I really didn't want to go to work there. The equipment was old, it was beat up, it was not well maintained, and that was bad. And probably the worst thing about it was the attitude of the staffers that I had to come in and go to work with. KLOL had just celebrated its 10th anniversary on the air, and up until about that time, it was sort of like Radio Montrose. You know, it was like a hippie kind of joint. And there were an awful lot of listeners out there. Millions of people wanted to be part of this party. So partially what we did was we grew the size of the neighborhood.
Houston, the nation's fourth most populous city.
Houston was really a boom town. People that had lost their jobs in the north were coming down here to work offshore. They were coming down here to build all the houses and major skyscrapers that you see around now in different places.
Where the dawn of each new business day brings to life the irrepressible spirit of Texas.
People all over the world have always had misconceptions about life in Houston, Texas.
When midnight tolls, the night watchman takes over. Keith Miles is the night watchman. Midnight till dawn, with specially selected cuts.
There were some times, like in the evening, I could play like Chick Corea or play Miles Davis, you know, or at the very least play like some really cool things from like Genesis or Pink Floyd.
Ed came up with the Rock and Roll Army, and that definitely punched the last nail into Mom's coffin. What could be more opposite of any kind of marketing label you could put on a radio station than the Rock and Roll Army for what had been this hippie bastion for so many years?
If you'd like to join KLOL's Rock and Roll Army, just send us your name and your address, and please include your zip code.
None of the jocks were really that high on the whole idea because it was military. And these guys were, hippies. It was like, no, man, I didn't support the war. I didn't support the Army back in the day. Now you're asking me to be a lieutenant.
In all honesty, I think a lot of the disc jockeys at KLOL at the time would give the Jones family like just gray hair because, we would come up with these ideas and they would just shake their heads like, no. And we go, but it'll be fun.
I said, I'll do it, and I'll be a colonel. And that's where the colonel was born. We had listeners in Thailand. We had listeners in Germany. And this was before the internet. A lot of them were military people. And they had friends back here who would tape our shows, just run cassettes, and then mail them boxes of cassettes at KLOL. The KLOL studios were covered floor to ceiling with photographs of our listeners. So if you wanted a Rock and Roll Army card, you had to send in a photo. So we had photos everywhere, and they were all kinds of photos. There were school pictures, the little inch by inch school pictures. There were 8 by 10 glossies. There were pictures of naked men. There were pictures of naked women. I got a picture one time from a guy of a kilo of cocaine and $10,000 cash, all just piled together. And that was his picture that he sent in for his Rock and Roll Army card. And we sent him a card, so that was fine. And the amazing thing about it was, we probably had close to 1,000 or two Rock and Roll Army members in prison. This guy's doing, 10 to 25 for armed robbery, but he's got a Rock and Roll Army card and he's thrilled to death.
So we'd start getting phone calls from listeners. They said, man, I got jacked up in San Jacinto County. I got pulled over because they said I had a taillight out. I didn't have a taillight out. I had a taillight out after the cop knocked it out.
They would look in their wallets, and if they had their Rock and Roll Army card in their wallets, they would take them down for possession of drug paraphernalia. It was a plastic card. It was about this big. Oh, you're using that to cut cocaine lines. We would actually get on the air and say, don't put a KLOL bumper sticker on your car if you live in the following neighborhoods, because you will be stopped and you will be hassled by the cops.
Let my people rock.
Good morning, Houston. This is Moby on 97 Rock.
KLOL was a worthy opponent because they had history, and we did not. And the listener could care less about the history. All they knew is that 97 Rock was up and coming.
Why do people listen to me, Moby, on 97 Rock? Well, I got great rock and roll, comedy.
So we bombarded them. I mean, I put that station everywhere I could. We had 1 million bumper stickers printed the first run, and we gave them all away and printed another 1 million.
It could be called a radio war. We know for sure it's expensive. The giveaways on Houston radio may make this city the radio capital of America.
The current 97 Rock $1,000 bonus record is by Led Zeppelin.
And it was a brutal battle between 97 Rock and KLOL. We just had the edge. We had Moby in the morning. We were a little bit more, at that time, organized than KLOL.
It forced KLOL to step up and show everybody we got the heritage, we're the big dogs.
I have been gone from KLOL for about 10 years, from 73 to 83, in the film business. And I called Jay Jones one day and I said, I think I have an idea for a TV simulcast that KLOL might like to be a part of.
Rock Radio 101 KLOL presents 101 Rock Plays.
After I had done this for 6 months, almost 6 months, Jay and I talked about me taking over the position of general manager for the radio station. So the day they announced me as the general manager of KLOL in 1983, same day, Colonel St. James, who was doing afternoons, said, why quit? So he walked out, went across town to be the afternoon guy at 97 Rock.
97 Rock, Colonel St. James here, finally Friday afternoon.
It was rough. It was hard. It was hard going from KLOL to 97 Rock. People on the street would say really mean things to me because they thought I was a traitor.
I hired Crash the same day.
Hi, this is Crash from 101 KLOL.
Said, fine, you leave, I'll bring Crash in. And we'll put Crash on in the afternoons on KLOL. He'll be the afternoon guy, and you'll wish you had never left.
And now everybody wants to hear crash in your dash, mama, keep it between the ditches. It was really a battle between 97 Rock, and I think at that point 97 Rock really forged ahead of them, and I was about to lay the hammer down on them. And so who you gonna call? Crash.
Here's a guy that was here in the 70s. He knew the station, he was part of that heritage, and he came back and made the changes, and we were kind of all shaking our heads like, you want to do what? But they made sense after they got implemented. So we're like, okay, Pat, roll with it.
And our promotions people at 97 Rock would not hesitate to go to a KLOL promotion and pass out our stuff. And then again, the KLOL promotions people wouldn't hesitate to do stuff like that to us.
One of our listeners would start stickering KLOL, bumper stickers over top of like 97 Rock stickers.
Is that a way to get out to the people by showing up at their events and kind of taking it over?
I never thought of it that way. I always thought of it, how can we fuck with them?
There was a morale problem. We had this huge competitor at 97 Rock with seemingly endless piles of money to do with as they wished. I mean, they bought out the Who concert.
And Louis Messina was the president of Appice, and we put on a big pitch about how we wanted to own the Who. And I handed him an envelope that had a check for $1 million, an ABC check for $1 million. And nobody played with money like that, especially back then.
Biggest bands of our time, they buy the entire concert out. And by the way, the concert's at the Astrodome. Okay, it's not at the Summit.
K101 is giving away a genuine Texas oil well.
Now in the Business Tonight marketing section, radio contests are reaching absurd heights these days, but they're reaching new audiences as well. The winners of the KLOL contest in Houston faked an airplane crash into their restaurant.
The brand of KLOL was always rebellion. It was rebellion against the status quo. It was rebellion against the values of America that had become outdated. Here's a little taste. Just get away from your life, dull or fulfilling as it may be, and spend some time with us and let us take you to a magical place.
The 101 KLOL 7-Eleven Poolside Party Patrol, bringing beer, koozies, refreshments, and KLOL rock jocks to liven up your poolside party.
Doug was the one that would go, let's hang a giant bra from a billboard off the Katy Freeway and see what happens.
My job as promotion director, working with the program director, was to find out the sort of grand prizes that would get the public's attention.
The Change Your Life sweepstakes, which is a more civilized way to say an augmentation. And so we thought, let's introduce the contest by building a giant 40-foot bra. And we'll hang it from one of our billboards in the middle of the night. And then when people wake up the next morning and drive to work, they'll go, oh my God, what is that?
101 KLOL, a finely tuned rock and roll machine.
When we gave away Corvettes, it was the same thing. We get a call from Southwestern Bell, and their representative says, what are you folks doing over there? And we said, well, we're conducting a contest. Is it a telephone contest? Yes. Well, you're blowing up trunk lines all over the city because everybody's trying to win this contest.
I remember the Silver Surfer, bumper sticker. I had it on the back of my Toyota Corolla when I went to Taylor High School with a lightning bolt through the skull and everything.
Their iconography, their visual symbols. I mean, you had the Runaway radio and the Silver Surfer, and people just love to have that on their car because it branded them as people, too. I don't know, pulling up in front of Cactus with your Camaro with a 101 sticker on it, listening to ZZ Top kind of defines it all for, say, 1980. The Houston rock and roll experience.
But the advertisers and the community, it tested evil and demonic and things like that. We had to get around that because, we needed advertising money. The Silver Surfer had to go. Okay, so we worked out a transition, and rather than try to sell people on a new logo, which our ad agency tried to do, the Runaway radio, head on rock and roll, we said, we're going back to the roots.
96.5.
What eventually happened is that 97 Rock had to be sold off. because of the capital cities ABC merger. And to make a long story short, they essentially destroyed 97 Rock, forced us to actually change the call letters of the station, the name of the station, fired Moby, which was a mistake.
It was a scenario we saw around the country, real tight, very sort of slick rock stations came in, not very interesting, but very listenable. They're just music machines. And as most of them, you know, they had that initial impact and then kind of faded away.
We withstood the force and managed to hang on. And then one day we got a great break and they went away.
We were thrilled. It's like, look, they're out of the format. If they had thought they could beat us, they would not have left the format.
See you here on Rock Plays. Happy trail.
Each one of the times I was kind of hurt that I left. I think it was time for me to go as well. But it was okay. Now it's okay. I had that cross to bear for quite a while. But the last time that Pat Fant fired me, or didn't renew my contract, it was a business decision. So, Crash, you got a couple of minutes? I said, oh, no. Here we go again. So I went out, cut my hair, put on a coat and tie, went out, tried to find a job. Sit down and do an interview like we're doing right now. Are you Crash? And then we tell us Crash stories. I saw you introducing it. I mean, their demeanor would completely change from this business-like guy to this, hey, man, I saw you. They get in the Crash mode. And we'd talk, had exchanged Crash stories for 20 minutes or so. And I said, well, how about that job? So, oh, I can't give you a job, man. I'd just get you trained and you'd be back on the radio. You're my favorite disc jockey.
KLOL weather's going to be partly cloudy and mild tonight.
I went into the program director's office at Y94 and he said, you know, you're never going to make a living at this. You're never going to make the same kind of money that the guys make. You're never going to get a drive time shift. That's just the way it is. Women don't do drive time, so you're never going to get something like that. And when you tell me women can't do that job, women aren't going to get drive time, it's like he laid down the gauntlet. And I wanted to prove him wrong, and he did.
101 KLOL, the album rock station with the man.
You know, I always knew that being a female rock and roll DJ was going to have a short shelf life. It was just the nature of the beast. So I better get in, work hard, hit hard, reach my goals, learn everything I could, meet everybody I could, and figure out how I was going to use that as a platform to move forward. My maiden name is Nicholson, Dana Nicholson. And that first night I was on the air, that's the one thing I have Bill Todd to thank for. He called me and he said, I hate that name. I love Allison Steele, the Nightbird of New York City. I want you to use Steele. I don't want you using your real name on the radio. I don't think it's safe, and I hate it anyway. So that's how Dana Steele was born, and you know, what a great radio name.
Dana in on a 2 for Tuesday with 2 from Pink Floyd, including new ones.
The reason I got the job at KLOL was it was the Texas Jam in the Houston Astrodome, and the female that was on the air that normally did overnights, I think she was on in the middle of the day, and she said, here's more Zep, you fuckers. And there was no delay, it just came out of her mouth. And they fired her and gave me her job.
4-pack of passes to see Ian Moore.
Oh, I listen to Dana Steele all the time. I mean, Dana Steele was just one of the pillars of being on air at KLOL. Dana Steele played great records and like Crash, you know, always had a point of view.
Dana Steele, that is 2 from Brother Kane off of their
Dana Steele was just a groundbreaker. She knew how to play the musical game. She knew how to play the radio game. She knew how to make true friends with artists and people in the business. My fourth album, the Yes I Am album, was blowing up. I was playing the big Houston arena, and she had said she was going to come to the show. And then something came up, and I think it was maybe with another artist, and I got all like, oh, really? Oh, all jealousy, you know.
Hello?
There was a certain phone number that you could call KLOL, and it would go straight to Dana. So on stage, I told everyone to get a pen and paper out and write this number down. And I said, now tomorrow, I want you to call, that's Dana Steele, I want you to call her and tell her how much I missed her. and how much I really wish she could have made the show. And, just let her know that you had a good time or whatever, so boom. So she, the next morning, I mean, I don't know how many people actually did it, but enough for her to take notice. And so she was like, oh, yes? Okay, so that day on the air, she said, well, if you'd like to know Melissa Etheridge's fax number. And so on the air, she gives out my fax number. And that's back when you had a huge roll of fax paper in your fax machine, right? So when I came home 2 weeks later, there is a pile of like the whole roll had rolled out with people faxing me. Hey, Melissa, we love it. Dana Steele said blah, 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 blah. And so I said, all right, touche, you win.
By the way, if you get a chance, it's a new book coming out. It's called Sharp Dressed Men.
She was a rock and roll chick. The kind of girl that rockers like.
Hi, from Texas Tapes and Records with the Scorpions, I'm Dana Steele with the Rock Place Files.
In her voice, she had a distinct voice. She had a way of talking with her Texas accent, the whole deal. She embodied Houston, Texas.
I mean, Dana knew Van Halen. I mean, like they were all her brothers. I mean, it was incredible, and so she knew all the stuff going on with Van Halen, and others too. Sammy Hagar was a great, great friend of hers.
When you had a support at a radio station by anyone, then you got airplay. Because back in those days, man, it was freeform. The DJs got to play what the fuck they wanted, right? So they played whoever they felt like playing. If they didn't like your music, you weren't going to get played. Even if the record company came in and said, we need this hit, get the hell out of here, go to the top 40 guys, pay those guys off. So somebody like Dana Steele, she was actually playing my music before I joined Van Halen. And I remember on Standing Hampton record, a song called I'll Fall in Love Again. Became a big hit in Texas, and it went, #1 on all formats, and it was the only state. And it was like I had a #1 record in Texas and nowhere else. It was top 40. It never got into the top 40, and it's because of people like Dana Steele, just pounding it.
Anytime I came to Houston, I'd be calling him, or if I needed a record coming out, I'd call Dana up, and she'd always play something for it.
He let me know he was coming to town. He was like, hey, can I borrow your car? Because when you're on the road, it's hard to get to the drugstore, to a grocery store, even go shopping for clothes or whatever you need. And I said, sure, because I was doing nights at the time at KLOL. Tell you what, I'll come get you at the hotel. You drop me off at the radio station. You go to the Summit, do your gig. I will do my radio show.
I was supposed to pick her up or give her a call back or something.
My shift was up and I'm waiting. Of course, nobody had cell phones then. So finally, I just called the production office at the Summit and said, hey, it's Dana Steele. I'm looking for Carmine Appice. And they said, he doesn't work here. I said, yeah, I know that. I know he doesn't work there, but he's the drummer for Ozzy Osbourne. They said, no, Sharon fired him when he came off stage.
It was really ridiculous. She basically told me my name was too big. They're going to bring Tommy Aldridge back and I should start my own band.
So I ended up with Carmine and the roadie and an entire drum set. And you can imagine, these things were massive, in the living room of my apartment for a couple of days until they were at least able to rent a U-Haul and get the drums back to wherever Carmine needed to get them.
Station KLOL 101 held an auction to benefit.
I think it was our second rock and roll auction. And we stood on the counters at Cactus Records at Sharpstown Mall, and Joan Jett, Joe Perry, and Steven Tyler came in. That was the first year we had celebrities, and that was when they were just making their comeback. And I had a big party that night at my apartment to celebrate, and everybody came. And
I mean, that really helps to your coolness factor when these people show up at your apartment. So I was riding high as a kite, and then here came Joan Jett. I mean, I was just like, Joan Jett's in my apartment. And she walked in and she looked at me and she said, where can I take a piss? And I was just, I seriously think I said not a plant. I think that's the first thing that came out of my mouth. Maybe I was just thinking it. And I showed her to the bathroom, and, we've become such great friends since, but it was just, it kind of threw me off. I wasn't used to women speaking that way.
With me, I've got half of Cheap Trick, Rick Nielsen, Robin Zander. Welcome to 101 Marketplace.
You know, I've got a great picture of, you know, everybody from Cheap Tricks over there after a party one night. We'd left a club and nobody wanted to go anywhere, so we just went to my house and I made sandwiches for everybody.
People don't realize that's a nice treat for these guys when you're on the road and you're in Denny's and and hotel rooms or whatever. So they just all ended up in my house that night. And it's a great picture.
It's the classically trained traffic master, Lanyard P. Griffith.
Also, we were doing traffic reports, and I've been thinking for a long time, you know, traffic reporting doesn't have to be so a stalled car outbound at Blaylock with the backup to Loop 610, the traffic breaks up at Gessner, and, you know, how boring. I was thinking, how can we be more creative and more rock and roll and talk to our rock and roll audience?
Some of the heavier traffic will break loose in the next 5 or 10 minutes when 3 KLOL.
So I said, let's just call it bondage. It's traffic and bondage because everything's tied up. The program director was just like, all right, it's going to be traffic and bondage, and you're going to be the traffic master, and we're going to have keychains made with a whip, and we'll have sound effects brought in, and by the time the weekend rolled around, I'd become the traffic master.
Hi, I'm Dana Steele, along with Charlie Weiss.
And I'm Lanny Griffith, the traffic master.
I had effects of leather jackets, leather vests, variations of bullwhips. There was never any one sacred bullwhip. People mailed in dog collars. They mailed in wristbands. Suddenly I was wearing boots and I with spurs on the back of them, and I had spiked collars everywhere, and I'd go out like that and people would just go crazy.
I'm Lanny Griffith, your Black Whip traffic master with
people who really enjoyed sexual bondage, and I guess had been doing it in the privacy of their bedroom and had never gotten around to doing it until they hear, you know, this guy on the radio. They started calling us with their crazy sex stories. We're like, this is, I think we've opened up a can of worms here, people.
We've got some pain and suffering out there right now.
Houston was a great radio market because there's no public transportation to speak of. You know, anywhere you're driving, one to a car, traffic jams. If you're in the car, you're mine.
And this is all it says here in the paper this morning.
When I took over the radio station as general manager, I knew very soon I was going to have a world-class morning show. We didn't really have it at the time.
By the way, it's 8 minutes after 8 o'clock with Hudson Harrigan. And
we were at KILT as Hudson and Harrigan, and KILT owned those names, and we wanted to establish our own names, and which are Stevens and Pruett names, and but we couldn't do it there. So we left there and went to KULF, an AM station in Houston, and we were there a couple of years.
Morning Melodies on Eagle 97 KEGL.
From there, we went to Dallas to an FM station, KEGL, the Eagle. Pat Fant came up to Dallas, Arlington, said, we want to hire you down here. And I go, it's going to take a lot of money because we're making good money in Dallas.
They wanted to come back. They never wanted to leave. It was just they had a non-compete, so then they went to Dallas. But I think once KLOL came calling, they couldn't get back fast enough.
The punch-up line full. Yes, do you have the word, sir? Hello? Yes, do you have the word?
Stevens and Pruett together were comic genius. Mark Stevens is the driving wheel behind the show and a great reaction guy. He's just the perfect reaction. And the forward momentum is always in his hands on that show.
He was the one who had his eye on the goal because he knew the punchline and he knew where he wanted to get.
Pruett is just a maniac. He's just a madman. No limitations and fearless. You put those two together, it works.
I'm Kevin and I just don't know anymore. Kevin, you're such a nice young boy. And you know why we keep Kevin around?
At any given time, there was 5, if not 7 people on the show that had an open mic policy. You stub your toe, you're not getting away with it. And it's just going to go around the room 3 or 4 times, and they're just going to bludgeon you. But at the same time, the audience is laughing, and they're in on it.
Stevens and Pruett, you guys are really crazy. Gee, Doctor, we're just as normal as you. Except I hear choppers. Incoming! Quick! Cover the nurse!
The bad boys of morning radio, Stevens and Pruett on 101 KLOL.
Here's the real Herman Steele with today's script in the Uncle Waldo Script of the Week contest, and he will never...
We had people who wrote Uncle Waldo Adventures, which was a dramatic presentation that we acted out with the voice of Nymphaea Scooter Pie. And, of course, the real Herman Steele.
Ah, jeepers, you fine arts lovers, wherever you are. Time to sit back and enjoy the legendary...
Yeah, the comedy is the vehicle. You can say or do any joke or say anything you want to say, especially if you make it funny.
I'm telling you, win big on 101 KLOL. Starting at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Willie Nelson, if you're listening, wake up. 7 a.m. You need the money. Oh,
Sam Kinison would come in, and he first came in to plug his comedy show, but he fell in love so much with the whole mob at KLOL, he would just sit in a chair in the corner all 4 hours and just watch everyone do their thing. And he couldn't get a word in edgewise because he was just so amazed at how the comedy going back and forth between everyone.
We're gonna see you Memorial Day weekend, right? I'm gonna be in Vegas with him. Uh-oh, he gave the whole thing away.
Yeah, he loved Mark. He used to fly Mark out to, like, when he would play Reno and Vegas. And whenever he was here, he would spend days with Mark. And when he would go out and do these shows, then he and Mark, he would sit and want for like hours for Mark to go through the show and tell him what worked and what didn't work.
Yes. Uncle Waldo? You know what I'm gonna do to you? What are you gonna do?
Stevens and Pruett hit the air at KLOL, and my phone was ringing that morning. What have you done? Who are these clowns, and where's this headed? So I said, just wait. It's gonna be fabulous.
All across America, I don't know if you know the names Stevens and Pruett, all right? But I'll tell you, gang, I'll tell you, in Texas, they're as famous as the Alamo. And they kind of make Howard Stern in New York look like a real jerk that he is.
You give credit to Howard Stern if you like, but Stevens and Pruett were doing it a long time before he was. They really set the tone for it, for this in-your-face kind of a radio.
It's the anticipation, isn't it?
They would have these segments where they were talking to women who were revealing their innermost fantasies.
Our goal is to keep up with the time. No, our goal is to be funny and entertain people.
If you don't have sex every night, he's ill. And how long will this last?
I feel like I'm walking on a very thin fence between humor and being professional.
People who called in, sometimes their questions were just kind of goofy, but often they were not. They were real. And sometimes I have had people, oh gosh, as recently as in the last few years, come up to me and say, thank you. You saved my life.
I get
Smelling
around
each other,
just
is it?
by laying and rolling around.
At the time, I didn't want to do anything in the shaming realm at all. It's okay, if you're gonna do this, here's how you can make it safer. Not 100%, but safer.
This was a form of escape for the listener. I could never attend a party like that. I would never discuss that subject with my wife, but I'll listen in while they talk about it.
If you bend it too far, yes, and you'll fall down. Yeah.
They were extraordinarily nice people who listened to that stuff. Oh, gasp. But it turns out a lot of my physician friends would turn it on while they were doing surgery.
Dana, I need to interrupt.
Please do.
Hi. Maybe there's a chance some of you remember me. My name is Moby. I used to do a morning show here.
There was $250,000 a year floating around for some of these guys. Was that Moby? Was that Stevens and Pruett? Did they make a little more? Did he make a little less? That drove Moby crazy. So then there was always the tension, which was great radio, between the morning show, Stevens and Pruett, and Moby.
Happened to me one time in the Far East, man. Vietnamese mafia? There was there was a horse's ass in my Ooh, looked just like Moby.
101 KLOL.
Every consultant and program director that you come across will tell you the music is the star and everybody else is just there for support. Well, at KLOL and the Runaway radio were the stars, and the personalities were the stars.
I walked into the program director, Ken Anthony, and I said, I got an idea. Let's do a morning show at night.
We'll play wacky music, and we'll have a wacky DJ, and give it a name people can remember.
Breaking all the rules, Outlaw Radio After Dark. I was the head outlaw. They came up with a concept for me to wear an old style Western duster. I had all my chapters, various chapters, a la Motorcycle Gang, of radio outlaws around the city, and they would check in with me.
Outlaw Radio was kicking ass, and Billboard magazine came calling and said, you know, we think you should be nominated for all these awards, and we won them. It
I'd be denying, I'd be cavalier if I said it didn't have a great impact on all of us, uplifting.
I'm pleased to report that the Stevens and Pruett Morning Show on 101 KLOL is now safely under control.
I would be the guy that got the phone call from the lawyers every morning at 10 o'clock. Every morning.
Please look for this apology request form in your Sunday newspaper. Mail it to me, and I'll send you a personal apology signed by Stevens and Pruett, suitable for framing.
The reason these guys are here is because the FCC right now has warned 3 radio stations to tone it down. They're getting a little bit too racy. And so
Did it ever cross a line? Yes. This line, that line? Certainly. If you're smart, a smart manager will budget for a line item that we would call fines.
You know, a segment of the society wasn't complaining, then you weren't doing your job.
We didn't mean to offend the community. Behind the scenes gestures were made to those communities who felt offended.
They were the biggest pains in the asses you could ever imagine, you know, because every day, or just about every day, I'd have to put out some fire that Stevens and Pruett lit. I really wanted to come back to Houston. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, working at a classic rock station there. Pat is the one who hired me to come back to Houston to program KLOL. And part of my job was to keep KLOL from either losing its license or getting fined thousands and thousands of dollars by the FCC.
Hey, stop that. Stop it.
And to be perfectly honest, there were times when I hated my job because it was so difficult.
This is the kind of material you'll be hearing on my afternoon show from now on.
So you know Dave, cool, calm, collected, had that swagger, long hair going, the sunglasses, that deep, raspy radio voice that we all love, and just walk up casual, hey, what's up? You know, say hello to the crowd, get the mic, and he was on. And it's not that it was a stark difference, like he was being some fake over-the-top somebody. It was just his real Outlaw Dave presence. Once he had a mic in the hand, it was like, it's on.
I grew up in Houston. I grew up listening to KLOL. I mean, people like Crash and Stevens and Pruett and Dana Steele, they were my heroes. And when I came to KLOL, I was actually getting out of radio. And I didn't want to tell them, hey, I'm just taking the job so I can figure out how to get a job in oil and gas or real estate or something. But yeah, so I came home and I got the job at KLOL, and suddenly I was having fun in radio again.
Outlaw Dave from Rock 101 KLOL with our annual Super Bowl party where we go to a lucky listener's house. Of course, we bring a big screen TV, a foosball table, food, and some beer.
I don't want to say that people got out of control and did drugs and drank and had sex, but people got out of control and did drugs and drank and had sex, much to the chagrin of our journalistic powerhouse integrity people. KTRH hated us. They would come in and complain about cigarette smoke, pot smoke, empty beer bottles. I'm sure if you were to depose some people, you could get more lurid details, but I'm going to decorum persists at this point.
These Sunday school classmates would say, Jay, you know, I can't believe what they're doing on your air. How do you permit that? And I'd just say, well, you don't take that seriously, do you? You of course you couldn't. I mean, it's just merely topical conversation, water cooler conversation. And by the way, did you hear about rock and roll up your sleeve and this ranch?
Well, we specialize in miracles here at the Humane Ranch today. I think it's important for any radio station to be a public servant, number one. But number two, for us, we were loose cannons and had control of the market, and we could do wonderful things for people. I thank God that I'm given the opportunity to help kids and animals. Not everybody gets that chance. So by being in radio, I had that chance and did it.
Time here because the lines are open and we're
Me doing jokes about naked women and stuff like that, I don't see it as a big sin. How did I reconcile it? The answer is very simple. I don't think anybody has a gig that's righteous, but I don't think anybody makes money that is totally wholesome. Can you think of anything?
Jim Pruett and Mark Stevens could be the most frustrating people had aggravating men and condescending and misogynist. I didn't even know what that word was back then. Men to work with, and at the same time, they could be the most generous. They were funny. They were brilliant.
If there was a good cause and somebody was in that studio audience and they had a desperate need to raise money, particularly for children, the checkbooks just came out.
In the 6 years that KLOL has sponsored its Rock and Roll Up Your Sleeve blood drive, they produced over 21,000 units of whole blood.
We first got approached by that. I was thinking, God, I don't know if our rock and roll, do we need to take their blood? Because we know what they do. You know, we know what we do. Is this good? Would this be healthy for the patient who receives their blood? I always said if they ever received my blood, they'd fly off the operating table buck naked, run down the hallway looking for a martini and a smoke. And we would set up in these malls like all day long at nighttime, and people would get off work, and we'd be out there broadcasting live, you know, me and Dana and Kevin, Crash, whoever. And we would literally have 1,500 people come to the mall and give blood.
It's a rock and roll auction, the 5th annual sellathon sponsored by radio station KLOL. If it's rock, it's on the block tonight. They're auctioning off 82 items played, worn, or signed by big-name rock stars.
We need $1,200 for Mick Fleetwood's drums. $1,200.
The audience loved it and they embraced it, and they came out 8, 10,000, 12,000 strong by the time we were at the end making it all work. All started from a box of stuff in somebody's drawer.
Well, and when they're the dominant source and everybody's tuning in, it's like you would get the information of, oh, this or that is happening in Houston, whether you were attending it or not. So you were in the know. So they brought you information. They brought you the latest update. They brought you that connection. They brought you the sense that they cared. And that's huge. That's what it's all about.
It's an extraordinary event. Only 24 hours ago, KLOL Radio organized this fundraiser for the Jim Urban Memorial Fund.
We had the ability to motivate our listeners when there was a need.
We didn't have to get an okay from corporate. I mean, within an hour, we were set up with the broadcast van at the Hard Rock Cafe, raising money.
And in 4 hours, they collected nearly $50,000 for the family of the slain officer.
We weren't just a radio station. We were part of the community. We were part of your lives.
This is the KLOL DJ's last day on the air. Moby leaves the world of rock and heads for Atlanta, Georgia, where he'll be spinning country music tunes.
Jay Jones sold KLOL and KTRH to Evergreen Media in 92 or 93.
Well, it's challenging in a family business to keep everybody headed the same direction. Some people are more interested than others. I was the only one that was working there. And we got an offer, and it was time to sell. My dad was sick, and it was a tough time. So it just made sense for us to do it.
In hindsight, it was really the beginning of a long, slow, I hate to say death, but you know, it was the beginning of the end for the traditional AOR format.
Grunge was really popular, and it's like you had, you know, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all of that. And then you were trying to stay true to your heritage, which meant the Rolling Stones, which meant, you know, Pink Floyd, Genesis, and all of that. So it was just trying to work that in and not have your listeners say, KLOL sold out.
To be honest, I don't think that we knew that it was a pivotal time, you know? Things come and go, you know, music styles come and go.
There had been a quote I'd read from Pete Townsend, was that if you want to change something, you need to become a part of it.
101 KLOL Houston, Exposure with David Sadoff, and
I definitely played a lot of things on my show before they got played on the station proper. Bands like Smashing Pumpkins.
Here's the new one. It's from World Party on Exposure 101 KLOL.
My show existed as a radio station within a radio station. When they knew they were going to hear things they didn't hear otherwise, that they could tune in, they hear the Jesus and Mary chain, and they can hear Sisters of Mercy and Pearl Jam.
The first promotional release that came out from Pearl Jam was a 3-song CD that included a lot of
Pearl Jam released their first album, 10, had only been out for, I think, just a week or two. I had been playing songs from a 3-song EP, a promo that they sent out to radio stations. I did an interview with Eddie Vedder and Stone Gossard.
Can you tell me about the song Jeremy?
Actually, you know, I've kept a lot of songs like or lyrical, some of the lyrical content like Shrouded in Mystery.
At home, drawing pictures of mountain tops.
But I think Jeremy, I think I decided I will start talking about what that song's about. It was in Richardson, Texas. I saw a small paragraph in the paper about a kid named, his first name was Jeremy, and he shot himself in the front of his English class. I literally wrote the song that night.
In retrospect, I came to find that it might have been one of the earliest interviews they ever did, certainly outside of Seattle. It might have even been the first. And afterwards, we went over to Butero's to have lunch, which was kind of funny to me 2 months later, because 2 months later, they had a video on MTV and they'd become so popular that that couldn't have happened. They would have been mobbed.
And then I realized one day, oh, I haven't seen Pat Fant in quite some time. Wow.
Houston, Texas was the largest metro market in the country without a modern rock station. I left in '95 to start another radio station here called The Buzz. I was recruited away by Shamrock Broadcasting in Los Angeles, and they owned a station here called Z107. It was also coinciding with the time when new rock, new alternative rock was just going crazy, and the market for it was so obvious. And classic rock and alternative rock weren't going to fit together quite the way you would hope they would.
He had been there at the beginning. He understood what made KLOL tick. And he had a real sense of the rock market here in Houston.
The whole world was moving toward new rock, alternative rock. And they convinced me to leave, and it was evergreen. When the Jones family was no longer involved, I didn't feel the exact same loyalty.
The ownership at that time brought in another general manager who was from out of town, who didn't really have any feel for KLOL's heritage, its history, what it stood for. And she thought many of the people on the staff were just lunatics. But the ownership at that time thought that they knew better, and they started messing with it.
And with the Telecom Act of 1996, the doors blew wide open and everybody started buying everything.
Now we're talking. Okay, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 really essentially was the thing that killed radio. They lifted essentially the ownership limits where a company could own 8 radio stations in one market. That was a lot, and that changed how properties, stations were valued. At the Buzz, we had 4 owners in 2 years. We had honk if you own us bumper stickers made.
The Telecom Act, of course, made radio stations just chess pieces on a board, and you would assemble markets, then trade chess pieces.
The decline of rock radio has a lot to do with the decline of the record companies and the way they started to be run. Because record companies in the beginning were run a lot like radio stations back in the days of AOR radio. You had individual owners who had taste, and they were record people. They grew up in the business. They're a corporation. They don't care about what the disc jockeys think. They don't care about what the PDs think. They don't care about what the people think in the city, other than that they're listening to it. What they care about is how many commercials they sell an hour and how much they can get for those commercials, and that's all based on ratings.
Rock 101 KLOL.
Houston.
Welcome. A Chancellor Media Corporation station.
Each successive corporation that came in, things changed a little bit. The dynamic changed. It became a little more structured, a little more conservative, a little bit more sales focused.
This all started when we got out of the business of listener benefit and into the business of listener tolerance. How many commercials can we shove down their throat? Do we really need to do a local contest? No, let's do a contest nationally. Let's have 26 markets trying to win the prize. What are they thinking?
This is what works in Cleveland, Ohio, and we tried this in Cincinnati, it didn't work, and we're going to remove this element and that element.
It was brutal and it was cutthroat. I mean, these were people that were calling me while I was in labor, early labor, freaking out over my child, knowing they've just told me they're not going to renew my contract, playing good cop, bad cop, because they wanted me to sign a document that said I would never sue them, because I think they realized what they had done when they gave me letters that said, basically, we're firing you because you're pregnant.
KLOL, in its final throes of existence, had to fend off the Arrow and the Buzz and beat them both, and then ultimately were bought up by the companies that own those two properties. And so all three of us were sitting at the lunch table together, and they made us kind of narrow our focus when we sort of overlapped both those formats.
The face of morning radio here in Houston is going to be changing. The longtime team of Stevens and Pruett is being disbanded.
So, you know, we all knew we weren't everybody's favorite cup of tea in the Clear Channel world, but we didn't care. We had a 14 share, you know. And the last day, again, none of us knew it was coming. I remember Mark getting pulled into a meeting and came out of the meeting looking exceptionally angry.
All I can presume is he must have pissed somebody off really bad. That's all I can presume, because nobody gets fired on a Tuesday. It was horrible. Horrible way to treat a man who had that kind of career behind him and had given that much to a succession of owners, each of whom thought they were smarter than the people that were running the show.
I would have quit when he was terminated, but I needed to have a job. My mother was still alive, and his wasn't. I had to support her, and then I had 3 kids, and so I couldn't bail. Not right then, but the mission was, Stevens was going to get us another gig, and said we're going to kind of do an internet thing, and that never worked out.
You know, you just don't get rid of the icons like that. I mean, they probably wanted too much money, and they probably got a little too big for their britches, but, you know, to get rid of them was just, I mean, it was like, why bother with the station anymore, really?
Walton and Johnson, mornings, KLOL Houston.
Rock 101 KLOL.
You know, the weirdest thing was when one day we woke up and turned the radio on and it was Hispanic. Just, and the phones were ringing, everybody's going, what happened? Nobody ever really knew. Just one day it changed.
Well, I tell you what, I was on the road and I came back and I tuned into KLOL and it was Hispanic, and nobody had told me, you know, so I'm just listening going, you know, okay, this is a nice little tune, and what's the next one, you know? But it was quite a shock.
Hey, it's Rule and Ryan from Houston's Mix 96.5.
When I was at Mix, doing the Rule and Ryan show right next door, and they shut it off to turn it into Mega 101.
Let's go.
They didn't have a plan. It was so cold. Even for radio people, we're like, this is so cold. You're not even gonna like say anything. No pomp and circumstance.
And I'm just skipping around going, what the fuck? You know, and finally I'm going, so I called somebody and I go, dude, what happened? He goes, you haven't heard, everybody's talking about it, you know? We all woke up and KLOL is gone.
There wasn't much of a heads up on any of it, and I think they thought, you know, we'll be all right. Everything's gonna just smoothly roll over, but the radio business, it's tough. One day you're on, next day you're off.
And Latin dance pop.
About that time, in the early part of the 2000s, it had become very self-evident that the Latino audience was here and that it was huge. There was evidence, very empirical evidence, that it was a young Latino audience that was also consuming non-English music. So there was a trend at that time of saying, you know, let's flip the format to Latino, not necessarily Spanish language as it had been known traditionally up until that point.
It was a hole to be filled. Like, reggaeton is definitely very popular. We were already like into it. We were just having to find it through different sources. So it was definitely a hole to be filled. It was just taking rock, years of rock and years of an audience, and then replacing it with reggaeton, which were two completely opposite genres. It's like everybody was like, wow, that was a really hard left turn.
Now, keep in mind, Okay, when you go to Mexico or any major Latin American country, yes, we have our own music, yes, we have our own artists, and yes, they're very big, but guess what? The Stones are still the Stones. I challenge you to go into any major market, go to a KISS concert and not find Latinos. You know, you take an institution like KLOL, and all of a sudden, you know, it goes away. You know, part of you goes away. And part of my religion was get my Rolling Stone, listen to KLOL, you know, hang out at Warehouse. That was kind of my my youth. Did we need a mega? Yeah. Did I hate to see KLOL go? Yeah, you know.
Because of specialization in formats, you no longer needed an album-oriented rock station that played new and old stuff, because if you want new stuff, you want to go to listen to the station that plays new stuff. If you want classic rock, you go to that station.
Houston is different. This is a really different town than it was when I arrived in 1983. Society has changed. We've all changed. And what worked back then doesn't necessarily work today.
Yank the curtain, I'll cue the players. Gotcha, big. You'll do what? Cue the...
It was theater of the mind. There was it was a time where you didn't have as much instant gratification with the internet. I think a lot of the 90s, mid-90s, and late 90s studio cams, while embracing technology, kind of let you too far behind the curtain.
I've discussed the matter again with Stevens and Pruett, and I'm sure they'll be behaving like choir boys in the future.
I think a lot of that stuff that we did that was interesting at the time has sort of now been done. I mean, for God's sake, there's naked dating on television now. You know what I mean? Like, the things that Stevens and Pruett kind of pioneered have been adopted into the mainstream, and once that happens, you're not a novelty, you're not cool anymore, you're old hat.
I mean, riding down the road in Houston, you know, when I got bored with CDs or the cassettes cassettes at that time, yeah, you had the radio on because you knew something good was going to be on there. You know, you had to choose radio or this cassette. Nowadays, I don't even turn the radio on.
It's sad that that sort of thing has gone away, yet I have children, and I see the way they get their music. They don't have a radio station. They're not loyal to a radio station.
There's a wonderful benefit to have everything at your fingertips, to be able to listen to anything you can think of on demand, but you're limited by what you can think of. And I think what we've given up for the convenience of having everything at our fingertips is we've given up that wisdom, the wisdom from people like Crash and Dana Steele.
You know, my new record didn't get any airplay. You know, hey, Sammy Hagar's got a new record. All right, here's I Can't Drive 55, you know. that's the way it works.
Obviously, I miss it, you know, but like I said, you can't get too hung up on things like that, you know, because when you say they've had their day, at least they had the day. A lot of places a lot of people never have a day at all. And they were a huge influence in this town.
KLOL wasn't just about one specific music genre. KLOL was about a community, an attitude, and a lifestyle.
You can pick up any station and put it in any other town and nobody would notice. You could not move KLOL. KLOL was Houston.
Texas Rock and Roll Authority. 101 KLOL, Houston.
Houston's First Lady of Rock and Roll, Dana Steele on Rock 101 KLOL.
Brian Johnson of AC/DC. Saw him off and on for about 6 months, and I remember he used to call and
After a while, he'd go, "You didn't understand a word I said." I was like, no, just that accent. After the show in San Antonio one night, we went to, the oldest famous restaurants on the Riverwalk. He kept ordering nachos, and they kept bringing us matches.
Voted most likely to drown in his own vomit. The Bastard Child, Grego, on Rock 101 KLOL.
Ozzy Osbourne, he smelled so good. It's kind of weird, Ozzy smelling good. You wouldn't think that. I wound up wearing the cologne that he was wearing from London, and I was able to order it, so for many years I wore the same cologne that Ozzy did.
Hi, this is Lyle Lovett, and I admit it. I listen to Stevens and Pruett on Rock 101 KLOL.
The only reason I left was because I could not stand the hurricanes, the rain, the flooding, the tornadoes. I got scared sometimes. And some of those thunder showers and those hurricanes whip up, and I was like, oh no.
This is Dusty Hill with ZZ take two. This is Dusty Hill with ZZ Top, and as much as I hate to admit it, I do listen to Stevens and Pruett. Why don't you?
Eddie Money was going to play a sold-out show at the Agora Ballroom, brought to you by FM 100 KILT. He made a mistake and gone in the wrong radio station. They're over there promoting the fact that, yep, Eddie Money's going to drop by any minute. We're going to talk to him about tonight's show. He never made it. He spent the entire afternoon with me.
Outlaw Dave. Outlaw Dave. Outlaw Dave. One more reason this country's going to hell.
Outlaw Dave.
On Rock 101 KLOL.
Yeah, right. Correct.
Sammy Hagar, the guys from Van Halen were always so gracious to me, but it was getting to meet people from like Kiss and Zeppelin where I reverted back to being this starstruck kid from Spring Branch, and even to the point where Robert Plant kind of mocked me because I was stuttering so much, and he mocked me to the delight of this young lady that he was hitting on. So forever, I'm always a little burned by Robert Plant, but.
Hey, this is Red Rocker Sammy Hagar from the Wobble Readers, and I admit it, I listen to Stevens and Pruett on Rock 101 KLOL.
Are we good? Yes. You bet.